Hello and welcome to a short special episode of Elvis Rings and Nerdy Things. This trailer for the Rings of Power Season 2 is about 6 days old, but we're finally getting to it. We were a little distracted by House of the Dragon. But here we are. We're going to not do a full breakdown like we have in the past of the first trailer for Season 2. We're going to just talk about a couple insights that we have, opinions that we have, and some predictions for Season 2, which comes out what day, Sam?
August 29th.
Yeah, something like that. But we're relatively excited, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
As excited as you could be after a dismal first season.
I was going to say, it was funny, because before we hit record, we were talking about it, and like it was very evident that we really haven't thought about, I mean, maybe both of us haven't thought about Season 1 in a while in any particular detail. Like, we talked about the first trailer for Season 2 that came out, but there were things about Season 1 that just totally slipped our minds. And that's not for lack of trying. We watched each episode twice, I think. We talked about each episode for an extended period of time. We consumed a lot of other commentary. And, you know, I think there's more than enough evidence that Season 1 was not great.
And even 2 months ago, I attempted to rewatch Season 1 of Rings of Power. I made it 3 episodes. Then I couldn't take it anymore. So before Season 2 comes out, I really need to do my homework.
I know. I was
go
thinking
through
about,
and rewatch.
Like, do we need to have like a recap? I don't think we need to do a recap of episode 1 as an episode, but they're probably maybe just rely on like the previously on clips and things like that.
And they've done it in the past. So like when Game of Thrones releases new seasons or released new seasons, they did a pretty thorough recap of the previous content. So maybe Rings of Power will do the same with this show.
That's true.
My first.
Yeah, big number 1 topic.
Yeah, my first overall thought after having watched this trailer for Season 2 is that why couldn't this be the first season? It really feels as though you could have someone can come into Rings of Power in Season 2 and hopefully feel like they haven't missed anything. At least that's how it feels to me, just looking at the trailer. It seems to be much more akin to what the real lore is about this time period and everything that's happened. Season 1 kind of went off the books a little bit.
Significant. I mean,
yeah, not even a little bit. Yeah, I'm being a little generous. It reminds me a lot of The Witcher. If you follow the books, good things tend to happen.
Yep.
Season 1 and 3 of The Witcher, great. Season 2, when they go away from the books, horseshit. I'm hoping that we might have similar data after this second season, that they begin to align a little bit closer to the books, and then we get something that's actually quality and something that's worth watching.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I think highlights this is Mordor. The big Mordor plotline in Season 1 was getting a sword to unleash a flow of water that would trigger a volcanic eruption that would create this landscape that was conducive to orcs. None of that is canonical. In the lore, Mordor was created by Sauron and maybe even by Morgoth, but it predated it predated the Second Age. It had been in Middle Earth since at least the end of the events of the Silmarillion, the wars over the Silmarils. And now Season 2 starts, and Mordor exists and orcs live there. So it's as if we're just kind of going back to what the status quo ante was in the books, which is fine. And I think I wonder how much they will just ignore the things that happened in Season 1. Like, I saw there's a shot, and I happened to hit pause, and it's a close-up of Adar, obviously new actor, but then he's got the sword like sitting next to him. And I was like, are they going to meditate and talk a lot about all of the things that happened in Season 1? Or is it just like, oh, this is Mordor now, and we're going to move on to seemingly the conflict between Adar and Sauron? The more they do that, the better. The more they ignore
bullshit from season
quickly
one.
move through the bullshit is great. Like I'm thinking specifically of Galadriel's awful characterization as a hothead moron with no political skills. It would be great if that Galadriel is gone and you can chalk it up to she learned her lesson over the course of season one, or you can just be like, oh, Galadriel from the books was wise and smart and political. Cool. That's who we have now.
Our next big thing, mixed review or mixed consensus between the two of us, or we weren't able to find consensus on Tom Bombadil being in the show. And when we were watching the trailer in particular, I had two thoughts about Tom Bombadil. The first one was, I'm really excited for the actor who portrays Tom Bombadil. I think that's going to be one of the best performances of this season. But I also think it's going to be the one that frustrates me the most because it's going to move the farthest away from established lore for the character. And there's one in particular scene where Tom is talking to the stranger. I think we're still calling him. I don't even think we've confirmed that it's Gandalf yet.
Well,
we've assumed where Tom is talking to this stranger Gandalf character. And he says something about worrying about the fate of the people who live within Middle Earth. And Tom Bombadil doesn't give a shit really about everything outside of his own little realm. Now, if you're going to explain to me why he's had that change of heart, apparently, and then only focuses on his little realm in particular, then cool. But I don't know. I think it's going to really, really frustrate me as the season goes on.
I mean, we were just kind of shooting a shit about this before we hit record, and an obvious solution presented itself, which was have the Gandalf character find a mentor or a figure on his journey that will give him instruction and motivation. Just don't make it Tom Bombadil. It could be a blue wizard who canonically went east. There were two of them. They went east. They were tasked with preventing or limiting the influence of Sauron and guiding the free people, similar to what Gandalf and his cronies were assigned with doing. And if you wanted to have a character for Gandalf to interact with who was knowledgeable and influential, just make it one of the blue wizards. It doesn't need to be Tom Bombadil. And it's, again, it goes back to one of those things of who is your audience? People who only know the movies don't have any idea who Tom Bombadil is, so it won't matter to them. It's not going to be a cool little remember Tom Bombadil thing. And then people who've read the books, people who like the books, are going to know that this isn't Tom Bombadil. Like, this is not the character of Tom Bombadil. It's a person, it's an actor with that name. So it's like you're not gaining anything by making it Tom Bombadil, but you could easily make it a blue wizard, and people who watched the movies wouldn't know what you're talking about. People who read the books were like, oh, that's interesting. They looped that in. And you would run a much, much, much lower risk of annoying people or turning people off.
But really looking forward to Rory Kinnear and his portrayal of Tom Bombadil.
They don't lack for bad actors. It's so frustrating. No. It's like they have so many good, like we talked about this before. It's like it looks great.
Yeah, and the orcs. Acting, the orcs look phenomenal. Like it's prosthetic, live action, real humans in character, and that's what I hated about the Hobbit trilogy is that most of them were CGI. And the look of the show, the cinematographer should win an award every year, I think, at the Emmys for this show, because it looks great. You also, I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but using a blue wizard, because there's two and we know that they've kind of disappeared and the assumption is that they've died, you could introduce the one as describing the threat of the cult of Sauron.
Mm-hmm.
By saying that these priestesses that we've seen in season one, and now we see them again in the trailer for season two, you could use them as the death of the first blue wizard.
Mm-hmm.
And then you mentioned previously as well that if you want stakes, kill off the second blue wizard, because then it makes sense canonically that the two of them aren't going to be in any properties moving forward. And it gives you to me, the stakes are higher if you kill a wizard versus killing a hobbit with no
Oh, for
powers.
sure. Like, what's the most shocking moment in the Lord of the Rings is when Gandalf falls off the bridge. Right? Gandalf dies. The fucking wizard dies. Yes, he comes back. Whatever. He's an immortal angelic being. But the reader in that moment is like, oh wow, Gandalf died. And it really affects the people that are with Gandalf. It leads to the shattering of the fellowship, right? When you got Aragorn and everybody is traumatized by the whole thing. The elves care a whole lot. Like you could have that happen in the show, and it would also like to your point, it would demonstrate the power of Sauron and the danger of Sauron and his followers in like a slightly different way, which would be interesting because it needs to be more than just a big horde of orcs, because that's like that is a more sophisticated villain is appropriate, one, in this day and age, and two, like the character of Sauron, or excuse me, of Saruman in the books is menacing and evil, and yes, he has a cadre, he has a gigantic army, but like he overpowers Gandalf and holds him prisoner. So like there's other ways to threaten the wizards than the Balrog and the horde of orcs, and you could have that with the cult and whatever else. It would be a cool way to kind of echo some of the stuff that we have in Lord of the Rings with doing something that is not lore breaking, lore adjacent, and like you said, would give us stakes, would give the Gandalf character a lot of motivation, and would be cool to see.
We also get in this trailer a lot of destruction, apparently, of Eregion, because we see Elrond on horseback in full armor charging toward a horde of orcs or an army of orcs. We see also the destruction of Khazad-dûm, apparently. We see a bridge being destroyed. We see the Balrog in action wielding a flame sword.
That looked fucking cool.
It looked really awesome. Yeah. So we're going to see a lot of destruction in this season as well. And the big plot points of the end of the Second Age are pretty much the downfall of Eregion with Sauron, and then Numenor coming in to kind of save the day. So, Sam, why don't you talk about the questions we have surrounding those two things?
Yeah, so we should say that the fall of Eregion in the lore happens a long time before the downfall of Numenor, the founding of Gondor and Arnor, and then the War of the Last Alliance, which I think we discussed this previously. Like, it's fine, I think, that they're condensing these things. They've already had a few issues with the sequence of ring creation and whatnot. Hold that aside for now. But the big question for me is, how does Numenor fit into this season? I think there's an argument to be made that Numenor didn't need to be in season 1 at all. And if anything, it kind of was just a complicating, diverging distraction. What you need to do is you need to establish. Sorry.
Well, just because my main question is, when you look back at season 1, what happened with Numenor? What did they do in the first season that really furthered the plot?
Yeah, their expedition to Middle Earth failed. Right?
Nothing.
Like that. That was like
you see a little bit of politics in Numenor. They, for some reason, decide to leave and go help in Middle Earth
because the trees' leaves were blowing. Right, that was the big thing.
And they fail, and all that has happened is that they've left Isildur in Middle Earth. That is the entirety of the Numenor storyline.
And the king died, which he was already like not involved with
but
anything.
You could have started it with season 2 and being, oh, the king is dead.
Yeah, that would have been a great way to open the season. Is there's a dead king, we have a succession
struggle
crisis,
for power.
Boom! Oh, we know this. Like, that's a familiar thing to people who watch fantasy, to people who watch just any sort of TV drama. You have the daughter of the king. You have this Ar-Pharazôn figure. You've got factions. That's interesting. It's within this world that we are familiar with, but we never kind of had politics like this before. And then, in the lore, Numenor shows up and saves the day, defeats Sauron, saves the elves. They drive him They drive him away. Eventually, Numenor becomes even more powerful and then subjugates Sauron and brings him back to Numenor, and that leads to the downfall. So we have to get the seeds of that in this season, and I wondered if it's let me say this: it's not uncommon for these trailers to only include stuff from the first half of the season, and I wonder if we're going to have a second half of the season where even more happens, and that could be good and it could be bad. I think one of our knocks against season 1 was that nothing really these had these hour-long beautiful episodes where nothing really happened. And I wonder if now, because they have a lot of ground to cover, if they're going to speed things up a little bit. If that means getting further away from the missteps of season 1 faster, I'm okay with it. But you need to stick the stuff that matters. Fitting Numenor into the story, there's a way to not do it at all, but we know we're getting some Numenor already based on this trailer. So it's like, so how does it fit in? Is there going to be any connection between the stuff happening in Numenor and the stuff happening in Middle Earth? Because it does, I didn't see any Numenorian soldiers at the fight, which is, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. So that's a big question for me is how does Numenor fit into the action at Khazad-dûm, the action in Eregion?
Any last thoughts, Sam?
That scene with Elrond saying death to our foes in Sindarin, and then the huge cavalry charge of the elves. Like, that is what we wanted, right? That elven power riding down a force of orcs. That looks so cool. And then I was just thinking of the Numenorian cavalry charge in season 1 and just how stupid it was. Like, so you're riding your horses in heavy armor like all night and all day across terrain that you don't know against a foe that you have no idea, that you know nothing about. But here's like, oh yeah, a massed cavalry charge against a foe, a large army on foot. That's an appropriate use of cool cavalry. We get the use of the Elvish, which I really like. So there's that. And then also relating to the elves, we get a little bit of dialogue with Gil-galad and an implication that there's going to be a conflict between Elrond, Gil-galad, Galadriel, and maybe Celebrimbor. It seems like Celebrimbor is going to be removed from the other three and kind of off doing his own thing, which canonically is in fact what happened. But it will clash with what we saw in season 2, where they're kind of all working together, or at least Gil-galad and Celebrimbor are working together. So I'm interested to see how the dynamics will work with Galadriel. At the end of season 1, seemed to be intent on keeping it a secret that Sauron was involved, that Halbrand was Sauron, but that's going to have to come out. And you see Gil-galad ask that pointed question, and I feel like there's no way for the story to move forward without her revealing that. Maybe Elrond reveals it, but I am interested to see how they're not because I think it'll be good plot, but because I want to know how they're going to write themselves out of the corner that they put themselves in at the end of season 1.
That was our short episode for the second Rings of Power season 2 trailer. Join us as we finish up House of the Dragon. We have episode 90 will be our season 2 finale. Episode 91 will be our season 2 recap episode. And then we might have to find some filler for our little break in between House of the Dragon and the first episode of Rings of Power. But we will be here for all of it. Sam, this is what our show started with 2 years ago.
That's right.
Rings of Power.
Boy, did we not know what we are getting into, both with Rings of Power and with this show. But it's kind of crazy. I mean, 90 episodes. I'd like to know how many podcasts make it to 90 episodes, especially ones with an average runtime of like over 40 minutes. So
who knows? But here we are.
Here we are.
And everybody have a good week. We'll see you when we see you.
We'll see you when you see you.